So I want to just start with, let's just talk about this whole thing for a second. In a small phrase, if you can, describe this entire, call it encounter, describe this entire trip.
In a small phrase. Wow. Well, I will tell you that we went there to share the gospel, and just 8 hours after landing, it became a trip of survival and just really running for our lives.
Yeah, we originally it was planned to be a site visit for somewhere that we sponsor because we'd never laid eyes on it, and so we went to kind of see the school, and we did not ever get there. So it just shifted into a very close holding pattern, and then do what you can to talk your way out of the country.
What took you to Sudan? Kelly, you want to, or whomever?
Sure. So in our missions department, we sponsor a school there in Sudan that trains pastors or people who want to be pastors. Christianity is very new to the country, and so people who accept Jesus and then say, I want to start a church in my area, they will come to the school and learn about that. So we have sponsored them for a little while, and we'd never laid eyes on the place. So that's what we call a site visit. It's part of our due diligence. We want to make sure that we're sponsoring great places with integrity. They're using the money well and actually doing what they say they're going to do. So that was why we were going. We were going to do that, and we were going to get to teach a lot and speak to women and teach as women in front of men, which is a high honor, and get to talk about some things that are just wildly Western about, culture things. And so it was very exciting to get that potential experience.
So talk to us about what happened. Kelly, if you kind of want to start.
Yeah. So we, like Megan said, we were going to teach, and I was so excited. We landed in Khartoum on the 14th of April, probably about 11:30 p.m. And then we get settled into our hotel, and we're ready to go to bed probably by 2 a.m. On April the 15th. And we have to be up by 7 a.m. for breakfast and a briefing to leave the hotel by 8 a.m. to head to conference. And so all that happens, and we arrive at our first church for teaching that day. And one of our other team members spoke, and then Megan was up second. I was up to go third. But while Megan was speaking, the first bomb was dropped. The RSF attacked the military headquarters just down from our hotel. And we were told that gunfire had broken out. We never heard the word civil war at that time. And so in my mind, based on our briefings and meetings prior to going on this trip, I'm like, okay, maybe it's some riots, protests. We're probably this is gonna be a short trip. We're gonna call up Delta and go ahead and get our flights adjusted, and we're gonna get out of here. That was where my head was. But probably within an hour and a half after that, gunfire breaking out, we were told that it was too dangerous to go back to our hotels, and that they had started bombing the airport, and they needed to get us to a safe house. And so when
you hear that the airport that Delta was going to fly in and get you out of,
yes,
what was going through your mind?
Crushing.
Yes. Just, okay, that is very bad news. What are our options?
Right.
And, I wasn't really worried until we got behind our original itinerary, but when we did hit that point and still had no good options, that was a very hard day. Because at that point we'd been there about a week, I think, and we still had no great options to leave.
Yeah. You went to the safe house from this moment after you hear that this gunfire is happening.
Right.
And then they pull you out and say, we gotta go.
Right.
What are you thinking? Where am I going?
Yes. We didn't know the people we would stay with. We had no clue where in the city and how far that safe place would be. We had no reference. We'd never been to this country before.
Yes.
As we were driving to the safe house, people attacked our car. We were fine through that, obviously, but they were physically hitting on the car, trying to get in. And, we can't know the motive of every person that does something, but it was obvious that they either wanted something from us or wanted to harm us.
Yes.
And so that was very unsettling.
And there's a language barrier.
Yes.
Right.
We do
right.
not speak Arabic, and some of the dialects are different from the people that we had with us that were translating. So it's, for the two of us who don't speak any Arabic, it was a lot of 3 people translation trying to get to us, which puts us on our back footing, because we're like, is that really what's happening? We're really okay? It makes you question a lot of things.
So you get to the safe house.
Yes.
Describe the conditions of what you were experiencing at this isn't like you were walking in, sitting at the kitchen counter having a conversation.
No. So it's a traditional Middle Eastern home, has a metal gate, feels like a compound, and lots of rooms, hidden rooms, has a roof. It has a patio that they call courtyard, so you go in through the metal gate, and the homes are made out of kind of a combination of some brick and mud and different things of that nature. And Sudan is still very, Khartoum, while it's the most populated, it's the capital city of the country, it's still very poor. And the roads were dirt. It's very desert-like area. And so outhouse is how the bathrooms are. We use squatter potties. That was a whole experience. And it's very hot, so there were days that the temperature reached 108, 109, and we don't have power. So they had one window unit air conditioner in the I would say the living room. And so at times when we had power, all of us would cram in front of this, window unit to try to get some, breath of fresh air, cooler air. And because it was a heavily Muslim country and we are Christians, we are Americans, there was a real need to keep our voices down, to keep us kind of hidden in the rooms, because they are traditional Middle Eastern homes. They don't have regular windows. It's just kind of squares cut into the sides of the walls. The houses are very close together, and there's different height. So the neighbor on the right, they could easily see into our house where we were, and they were Muslim. And so just knowing and not knowing if they were friendlies, the locals were under so much stress too, because by the time we got to the safe house, it was a bit surreal. It's kind of like, as an American, I was like, is this really happening? We have so much infrastructure here that a bomb drops, we have a military that's going to come in and protect us. We have police, we have just organizations, and so many things in place that keep us safe and that are constantly working behind the scenes to keep us safe. And in Sudan, that's foreign, right? And so while we're at the safe house, the RSF militia and the army, they're firing up. And so we start really hearing the bombings and the whatever, heavy artillery.
Right.
We know it's getting heavier because it's getting louder and the house is shaking. And then we also have to worry about neighbors hearing our voices. And it was a season of Ramadan, so the Muslims are fasting sunrise to sunset. Businesses are closed, but the locals are stressed because now there's fighting, and they've never experienced this type of a situation.
In Sudan, they've had wars before, but it's never happened in the city. So even the people we were with were scared because we as Americans have never experienced that and weren't trained for that, but they've never experienced that as locals either, because it had always been on the out in the bush, as they call it in Africa, like out in the village, out far away, never in the capital.
Right.
And so the locals were just as scared as we were.
And they were taking a risk of taking us in.
Yes.
Right? And so they didn't know this thing was going to keep going, but they were so kind and gracious to let us in. But because of Ramadan and limited opportunities to buy food, our food was very limited.
Talk to me a little bit about that. Like, at what point were you thinking, okay, days are turning into days that are longer than what we thought. Our airport has been bombed. We have people back home trying to help get us out.
Right.
But communication is obviously a hindrance as
Right.
well. Was there a point at the time for you both where you're just like, Lord, am I going to make it out of this? And what would this look like?
I remember texting our boss, John Tyler, and at one point and saying, we have hit a breaking point. We are all very mentally drained. We are running out of access to food. And I think this was probably on Friday, our Friday. You guys may have been sleeping, I don't know.
Which would have been about day 8 of us being there.
So, I mean, we just were hitting a breaking point. And the hosts that were so generous and kind were also feeling very weary, not because they didn't want to do it, but because it was a holiday and people were coming to see each other while they were all out of school and not working, and so it was putting them at risk because they couldn't anticipate when people would just show up at the house, and so then they're trying to cover, why are these white people here? And so it was putting them at great risk, and they were very stressed, and we were very stressed, and then they would have to sneak out to go try to find us food, and that was just, they were having to go a little bit further every time, and it was just getting very, very risky. And I was like, okay, we are at a threshold here. Something has to change. And it was that night that he called us with some options, and we were able to get a plan. But I really was like, okay, I'm about to go outside and hotwire a car because I don't know what else to do here.
Also, at that point, though, I was going to just add, by day 8, people in country had started, realizing they can monopolize on this situation,
Correct.
right? And so our coordinates were compromised. And that's a story for another day, how that happened. And so that also applied a lot of extra pressure. Mm-hmm. But just to kind of explain how food became even more rationed, the first few days we got a whole breadstick, Mm-hmm. Imagine like an Olive Garden breadstick. That was about the size of the bread. It was very similar to that, just without the butter and garlic, okay? And so, but by probably day 7, it was maybe 1 or 2 pieces of bread that had been like chopped up into like croutons, right?
Right.
And so it was like, you get a couple of croutons with your rice, or you remember that happening. And I remember going, okay, they don't even have access to bread anymore. And so it's just when this rice runs out, that's it. And
so you guys got a car, you got a plan in place. JT
Yes.
gets you this plan.
Yes.
And you have this small window to go. You take a car.
Yes.
You talk to some locals, right? How does this work?
Yes. So we were going through our local contacts and convinced a local, I believe he was a pastor,
yes,
to drive us across the city and kind of
in the middle of the fighting.
Middle of the fighting. Every time he would see a militia person or a military person, he would just dart around the corner so that we wouldn't have to engage with them. But I mean, he literally was like watching and turning. So it was like not a direct path to where we were headed. But he drove us across the city to the UNICEF building, which was very close to the fighting. But they had a bunker, and we were able to talk our way onto the UNICEF convoy, because while technically we were working with an NGO, we weren't listed as a registered international NGO.
When you say NGO?
A nonprofit.
Yes, a non-government organization. And so the UN has a list of registered international NGOs that they were kind of pulling from and working with to coordinate the convoy to get them out. Because of course, no country wants to be responsible for all of their goodwill workers to be, compromised. And so it was a great thing that they were doing, but it left out a large number of people who were there doing good work or other work, just business. And so we had to kind of talk our way into that.
I mean, because the only other option was that local was going to try to drive us to Port Sudan. And, when we got the call from our team here, it was 1:30 in the morning, and it was like, hey, you got to find a car, you got to get out by dawn. And we're like, it's 1:30 in the morning here, we got to be out by dawn.
Yeah.
So, a lot of things happened in those few hours, and, option A was beg, plead, borrow, jump on the roof, get in their trunk, get on one of those buses, because there's power in traveling in numbers. Because option B is the local drives you to Port Sudan, which was a 500-mile journey, and you had to go through militia-controlled land, army-controlled land, militia-controlled, and vice versa, and that just continued the entire way to Port Sudan. And the hard conversation was when they said they're not going to want the other people that were in our group. They're going to want Kelly and Megan. And not necessarily to kill us. We were more valuable than to, alive, but what would our living conditions be like if we were captured? So if we could sneak in and convince UNICEF that we were part of this NGO, and that was our best option. So I think our team we had no margin in our brain that they were not going to let us. No. We were not going to leave there. And so when we got there, they said, we told them our story, and they were like, well, we can't really tell you we can get you seats, and and so we just stayed and hung around and hung around and hung around, and we tried to stay in their leaders' kind of like vision, their face, because more and more people were just filing into the UNICEF building because they're desperate. They want to get out, right? Locals wanted to get out, and so we didn't want them to lose sight of us in this sea of thousands of people getting there. And one of our team members just kept going back and pushing the envelope. You got those seats? You got seats for us yet? And then it was, we think we do. We can't promise you that you're going to be together, and but we think we've got your seat. We were like, okay. So then we have to mentally prepare and adjust for being split up,
right?
And what that might look like, because again, we don't speak the language, and even in the convoy, we knew we were going to have to go through all these different controlled checkpoints in parts of the country, and that was a real fear for me, to actually be separated from Megan, because she was home. She represented home. She was familiarity, and we clung to each other in a new way that we never anticipated having to go through, right?
And thank goodness we were friends before.
Yeah.
Because if you weren't, you were about to be.
We were very good friends by the end, but we were friends before.
So when you got to the UNICEF facility and you got on that bus, you go to Port Sudan, right?
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, we waited for over 24 hours in the UNICEF building.
In the bunker.
And then we rode for over 30 plus hours to get to Port Sudan. So once we get to Port Sudan, we're exhausted, we're hungry.
Because we had 2 bottles of water each and some graham crackers that we had figured out this was supposed to be a 12-hour journey, and we knew how many cookies we could each have. And you get 3, and this is how many hours in between. And so a 12-hour journey ended up being 50-something hours because we were stuck at UNICEF for so long before the convoy actually left.
And there's no let me stop at Walmart real quick. There's no Walmart, and there's no time or access to that. We just, you have what you have. And so we were literally relying on the goodwill of other people.
Yes.
And it was absolutely the Lord that we would be hungry, and someone would come around and say, have you guys eaten? Would you like a meal?
Would you like some bread?
We're like, that is the strangest tuna and beans I've ever seen. Yes, give me that. I'm so hungry.
So you get to Port Sudan.
Yes, we get to Port Sudan. We're exhausted, we're hungry, we're tired, and we are looking for ferry.
We were under the impression that our team has purchased us 4 ferry tickets.
Correct.
So we're trying to find that location, get those tickets, and go get on a boat somewhere, right?
We're walking around the entire city looking for the ferry office.
Yes.
It's the heat of the day. Mm-hmm. We are trying to stay kind of covert because we're white women, and so our heads are covered, but we are also lost. I mean, we had the guys on our trip with us, but it was very obvious that we were lost. We had asked multiple people for directions. We finally find the office. The guy doesn't have the tickets. He doesn't know what we're talking about. So it was very...
At this point, too, they had shut down telecommunications. So
Correct.
We couldn't look up Google Maps to find things, and we couldn't communicate with our team back home. And so we discovered that it was a scam, that the tickets that were purchased were a scam because, like I said, people were monopolizing on the war at this point. And
yes, absolutely.
The banks, there was no exchange of money, so we only had American money, and so that that was a whole thing. And, you know, in safety, just walking around the city, it wasn't so much, you know, the color of our skin. It's just, you know, speaking English. It was like, are they European? Are they Americans? It represented a fluency. And so it just put us at greater risk.
Right.
And
You get on this, you get to Port Sudan.
We did. That was an interesting experience anyway, because we had to, as Americans, we're almost trained to not trust Middle Easterns. And we had to find these Saudis who were supposedly doing this good thing and already were suspicious.
Right.
And then surrender our passports to them, which as Americans we're told you never do. And we had to do that and then leave that location to go somewhere else and wait and hope and pray that they will show back up with them and actually take us out of the country to Saudi Arabia, which we have also been trained that as women, you have no rights, and it's going to be a
very
devastating
dangerous
experience.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to speak. You're not going to be able to do anything alone. And we're very independent.
Yeah.
So that was very
So it was preparing,
scary.
you know, trusting, you know, we just were informed that the King of Saudi Arabia had purchased all these tickets on this ferry that was going to leave at midnight. And because prior to that, you know, when we discover our previous purchase of ferry tickets was a scam, this guy at this ferry office says, oh, there's not a ship leaving again until it was going to be like another 3 days. And so we had no way to get hotels or money or communicate with our team. And I'm thinking, we're going to sleep on the streets, which, okay, all right. So it was constantly like having to prepare for the next deflating thing. It's like, okay, well, we've just done this, so yeah, we can do this.
Right.
We can do this. We've already been through a lot of hard. So guys, just know every step is just a step closer to getting us home. But there were definitely moments I'm like, we're never getting out of this country. We're gonna be stuck here forever. I mean, there was a real low moment in the unity of our team. I mean, we were fractured, you know, and just we were all feeling stress and tension, and we never felt. I told Megan, I said, I feel like we're having to take a donkey to get back to America. And it's got to swim across the ocean, you know, so which means that's not going to happen, and we're just going to live here forever, you know.
So you didn't, though, because you're here.
Yeah, it didn't. We didn't have to come on a donkey.
How did you ultimately get?
It was a real thing. So the King of Saudi Arabia did purchase 2,000 seats on this ferry, and so we surrendered our passports, like she said.
It's terrifying.
And they said, you get to the Mawani Club, which is kind of like Lady A Park here, except it's just gated. So it's controlled, gated. And you get to this park, and then we're going to have our buses come get you from there and take you to this ship. And we're like, and you're going to bring us back our passports, right? You know? And yes. And so we get there, and we were told the ferry was going to leave at midnight. We get there at 6 p.m. So we're like, okay, cool. We just got to hang out at this park for 6 hours. Y'all, we're going to get on this ship, and we're getting to Saudi Arabia. We get there. We knew we had a flight. Our team had purchased a flight for us to leave Jeddah. And so that's our, we'll tackle that task when we get there. And but midnight came and went, and it was probably 2 a.m. in the morning, 2 or 3 a.m. that these Saudi officials come to the Mawani Club, and they start just screaming out names. I mean, there's no PA system.
No, they're just yelling a name. John Smith.
There's over 2,000 people in this Lady A Park area, so it's like being at a concert with no microphone, right? And every human there is feeling that tension. They just want to get on the boat. Right? Everybody just wants to get out and go to wherever they're from. And they're just screaming our names. So we finally hear our names, get our passports, and we were told that buses were going to come and pick us up and take us to the ferry. We ended up about 4 a.m. in the back of a small Toyota pickup, and there was, I don't know, maybe 30 of us in that pickup truck. I mean, we were like, it was like a clown car at the circus. You know how they just all keep filing out? That was what it reminded me of the whole time. I mean, people standing on your feet and your legs. I mean, it was brutal. Thank God it wasn't a far ride, though, from that point to the ship. And you got to think, I mean, it's been days since we've slept, since we've had
truly eaten or
showered.
Oh, we don't even want to talk about how dirty and smelly we were at this point. I mean, it's been days. It was rough. Someone actually asked me and said, could y'all just smell each other? And I was like, no, I think the Lord protected us some way from that. but we could definitely smell ourselves. There were moments like I just held my head down and like I could just smell my dress, you know.
She went like this at one point to smell just like the side of her arm, and she was like, why does this smell bad? Like right here. If this smells bad, everything else cannot smell good.
So you get on this ship.
Yes.
And you've got to be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so close to freedom.
And we were told that ship was going to leave at midnight.
Again, not leaving at midnight.
It left at 8 a.m. the next day.
Right. Almost everything that said it was going to happen at a time happened about 4 to 6 hours after that.
Oh, our 48 hours. I mean, we were told 2 to 4 hours to get from Port Sudan to Jeddah. Then it was like 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 14. It was a 24-hour boat ride.
Across the Red Sea, yes.
Yes, and 3 hours into that ride, the toilets, the drains, sinks and stuff, all back up with sewage. And it's disgusting at all levels. And remember, we left 8 hours, just 8 hours after we landed in Sudan. We were prepared to teach at a conference with the clothes on our back and the shoes that we had on our feet, which were very thin flip-flops. And so on this ship, that's what we're still in. And we're on this ship so much longer than we anticipated. And it's like the thought of, it was painful not being able to go to the restroom and then needing to go and not, that was just a whole conundrum in itself. And so we tried to stay outside on the ship by the railing as much as possible, because for me, while there were many opportunities for breaking points, bombs being dropped and things, it was the sewage backing up that was like took me over the edge. But
it's very demoralizing, and it actually is in one of your very most basic needs to not be near fecal matter, actually. Psychologically, that can really cause trauma. And so it was very rough. There were 2,500 people on the boat and 3 women's restrooms. And so it was excruciating. And, we're still in Muslim territory. And so they need to do call to prayer, and, devout Muslims have to wash to do that. And so they're washing every time, which I respect that. That's a beautiful tradition that you want to enter prayer in a clean way. That's fantastic, except for the fact that now there is sloshy water all over the place, and that's not their fault, but it is not great conditions for the group.
So when you arrive in Saudi Arabia and you get off that boat and you're out of Sudan, what is going through your mind?
Please, Lord, let us get a shower.
Well, remember, we were prepared to experience Saudi Arabia in a different way in our minds as Americans, because, like Megan said, we're not really presented the best image. And so I definitely learned that, I had some biases about the Middle East. And I was so pleasantly surprised that I came back with those biases gone. The Saudis were the best, and they treated us with the utmost respect and kindness. They were so gracious.
Yes, very generous people.
When we got off the ship, the Saudi military were there, and they were giving us chocolates and roses, and like I could see real pavement, and I was like, oh, we're not in Sudan anymore. We're in first world country, and these people are nice to us. They have chocolate and roses, and it was just naturally tears. And at that point, we could see different countries represented. They were holding up signs like country workers, embassy workers, and so someone was able to communicate, look for your American consulate. And so we finally saw this little American flag, this woman holding up this little sign.
It was on her phone.
It was on her phone, actually, yeah.
She was probably an intern or something.
Like the best feeling to see.
And so I just run to her, and she's
because we knew what it was. We were like, that represents what we are. We know that thing. And so it was just one of those things that when you have been so removed from things that are comforting and familiar, when you see that one thing that is like, I identify with that, it's immediately comforting. It is like, okay, I don't feel like I'm in crisis anymore. Somebody knows me. Somebody sees me. So it felt really good.
And so, she got us to more American workers, and they got us on some charter buses that are kind of like American charter buses. They're very nice, and got us to immigration so we could immigrate in so that we could then leave the country, you know, on our flights back to America.
You land back in Georgia, and what goes through your mind?
I think for me on the flight, when I could see, like you know how you can watch where the plane is, and so you know that you're over the Atlantic, you're about to see land, and you know through the window you can start to see greenery. It's like I think I hit Megan's leg. I'm like, oh my God, we're almost home, we're almost here, and it's just instant security because you know we're so thankful to be Americans, and we know that we're safe and secure, but there's no way for any of us to really understand the depth of that until you're in a situation that's not secure. And you understand that there's so many forces working behind the scenes for us as Americans at all times here to keep us safe. And so for me, it was instant, like when we pretty much got off the flight, I was like, whew, you know, there was a sigh of relief.
What about you, Megan?
Mine was a little bit more delayed. I still kind of struggle with like, okay, turn it off, you're okay. Not because, we were talking about this the other day, not because I think a bomb is gonna fall or gunfighting is gonna start, nothing like that, but just, you don't have to run, you don't have to hurry, you don't have to work for the next thing, you know, you don't have to stress about where the next resource is gonna come from or who you have to protect or anything like that. Like, turn your adrenaline centers off. That is harder for me. But I'm obviously very grateful to be back in country and sleeping in a very nice bed, and you know, we have air conditioning and our own cars. We can go where we want. We can talk on our phone. We can, you know.
Yeah, we have access.
We have access, and we have guaranteed safety that we take very much for granted. So I'm very grateful to be home. I have to remind myself to relax.
Yeah.
Are you still shocked that this happened as you retell this story and you hear yourself out loud really explaining what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Is it still shocking to you that you too were put in this position that we were watching unfold on television? You two were in it.
Yeah. My only knowledge of Civil War was, you know, what I've read in history books. I know, you know, yes, we've had the Iraqi War and Desert Storm in my lifetime, but I was so far removed from that it, you know, doesn't feel like it's my war, right? And so it's surreal. It's very hard to digest and accept and process that we were really in that. And at any given time, I mean, we were 4 to 7 miles where we were in the safe house. We were 4 to 7 miles, and we definitely knew when it was closer to us. And we woke up to just the house shaking and bombs, and those were such low moments. So yeah, I think it'll always be hard to process, like, wow, that really happened.
Absolutely. It feels like we were living in a movie. We talked about it a lot while we were there, and it was happening, and also since we've been back, about how we're pretty creative people, but there's no way we could have written a story like this. And you know, at night, it was getting over 106 every day when we were there, and it's a very dry heat because it's desert, and so we were just miserably hot. And so at night, when it would get dark, we were allowed to go up to the roof and sit and kind of get that breeze. But it was a double-edged sword to do that, because then you can see the planes overhead and you can watch the bombs dropping. And you can see buildings on fire and things like that. And so it was like, yeah, you get air, but you get to sit up there and watch the war unfold. So it's very surreal and very, I don't know, palpable in my mind still. And I think it will be for a really long time.
You guys went there on a mission trip, essentially.
Yeah.
But I have to have felt, and it's something that like we talked about back here, knowing that you all were over there, and I kept thinking, this is that time that they're going to watch you and see how strong your faith is, right? So you kind of have this, you got to go even stronger into this, right? Because that's what you're there to preach, is that the Lord is on your side. And they say, yeah, but you don't live in our conditions.
Right.
And then you do. And then you can kind of feel where they're coming from, right?
Absolutely.
But then you also have to explain, but I've got a God who's greater that can get us through this. So, like, what was that like when you really had to dig deep and be like, put your money where your mouth is?
Right.
You know?
interestingly, I was the one that spoke right before the pastor kind of interrupted the day and called for intercession. And the thing that I spoke on was
uncertainty.
Yes, it was about having faith in uncertainty and not trying to force a lesson in the middle of the moment, like just letting God do what he's going to do and figuring it out as you figure it out. And little did I know that we would be literally putting those words into action moments after I said them. And so it was very interesting that I sit down and the pastor is getting up and calling for intercession for his country because we did not know and we were in uncertain times and we couldn't figure out what God was doing in this season. And I was like, I just, okay. And so, you know, it was very difficult, but then it was very cool too, because the four of us that were on a team together are all pastors, and we were able to have times of prayer and worship together where at some points we were singing and worshiping in 4 different languages. And so it was so cool to just be able to do that and have those times together. And it felt strangely like a little piece of heaven in the middle of hell. And so I hope that the people that were watching us were able to see that. I was explaining to somebody, like, of course I was afraid, but I also had confidence in the fact that God was going to get us out. I had no doubt that he was. I had no clue how he was, but I knew that he would at some point.
We didn't have any choice but to, I mean, part of surviving was we had to decide if we were going to believe in this God that we preach about and that we were there to preach about, you know. And while there were definitely low moments where our faith wavered and, you know, we wondered if we would ever get back home and see our families again and all the things. Ultimately, we were in a situation where our faith was developed.
Yes.
I don't ever want to have to be in a war again to have my faith developed.
Thanks.
But, you know, we went there with things to say we thought that were going to be said to others, to teach others, but the mission quickly changed, and it was like the Lord was doing a work in us. And I think that I'm certain that a lot of what we did in the home that week spoke to the people living there, and we would get louder and louder, and then they would come and
like, guys, you're still American.
Okay, we gotta.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you know, and so they would remind us they would bring us back to the risk, and so there was this constant cycle of wow, you know, and so that's what their life is like all the time. And I think for me coming back, one of the things that I struggled with is, I don't want to call it guilt, but I went there thinking I was going to fall in love with Africa, and I know that's what, you know, Megan wanted for me as well. And at first I thought, there's no way, I'm never coming back here, you know. But I did leave a part of my heart in Africa, because there are people there that are hurting all the time. This is their life all the time. And so there is this, I got to come home, and not just home, but to America, and where we have every comfort and convenience known to man, and people live to serve us, and all of these things. And so there's a part that's very heartbreaking, because I have felt deep grief, maybe even, for the family that we stayed with, that housed us, the 2 children that were there, and hoping that they were going to get out. And so I've been very worried about that. That's been a thing. And
yes, and I just want to underscore that too. I mean, our worship, our prayer would literally put them at risk.
Yes.
And so that's what they would have to quiet. And so our attempts to kind of steady ourselves through the storm or keep the faith was putting them at risk, and that was what we'd have to balance and navigate. But then we could come home to a place where we can worship however we want to.
That's right.
As loud as we want to, and that's a freedom they don't have.
Right.
They can't, if they're not doing it in this box, this way, they don't get a freedom. And so I think that's something that hurts the most, is that we get to come home and feel that relief, that like, oh, okay, deep breath, you're safe. You can do, you can believe how you want to believe. You can do it how you want to do it. They don't get that. And that's something that is very, very hard to just live with and know that if they want to worship loud in their home and just tell God he's the very, very best, they don't do that. They can't. It puts their very life at danger. And that's hard to imagine as an American.
And then just kind of the final question, and I know it's kind of something that you may not really know the answer to right now. What do you intend to do with this? I mean, you went through it, right? And maybe that was it. Maybe it was to do a working in you, right? But the story's incredible, and people can certainly take what they need to out of it. But like, what do you do with this now? Because it's one heck of a testimony.
Right.
Do you know yet? Like, do you wonder, Lord, what did you want me to do with this?
Well, I have a degree in writing, and I thought that was the silliest thing that I could have ever gotten. But I've already written one book, and so I suspect that there's another one in there. It'll take me some time to kind of get my thoughts in order about it and how I want to share the story, because there's about 1,000 stories in this one journey. But I suspect that I will likely do that at some point. And maybe nobody will read it. Maybe one person does and it changes their life. Maybe I am changed in the writing of it, but I probably will do that.
I think for me, I will definitely probably memoir this, if for anybody, my family, and my hope is that my faith through this will speak volumes into their lives. I've always said it, the greatest ministry that we have is with the people that live under our roof. And so I hope that in some way that I can impact my children or my grandchildren, or maybe even my parents, or people in my closest circle, right? But while I was there, I felt like the Lord definitely dropped and downloaded some messages. And so I'm hopeful for an opportunity to share some of those things, because just as the Lord rescued us, I'm a firm believer. There's so many little miracles that there's not enough time for us to divulge.
Right.
But we know as believers that, and by being in that situation, that if we wouldn't have left at this time, or if we wouldn't have made this turn and that turn, like this would have happened. They just dropped bombs on that street like just a few days after we left, and I mean, our time was running out, so it was so critical that we left. And so we just saw the Lord move in so many different ways. And that's what I want to tell people from my experience there, is just as he rescued us, I believe he wants to rescue you, and
Right.
maybe you're not in the middle of a civil war, but so many people are hurting in today's culture and society. And so I think anytime we can share testimonies of just big miracles and moves of God, and along with the Word of God, that he has a plan and purpose for that, to change someone's life. So I'm hopeful for opportunities that when the time is right, that those speaking opportunities will open up as well.
Yeah, absolutely.